The night my son-in-law grabbed my daughter's wrist across the dinner table, I almost stood up and slapped him. I'm not proud of how close I came. But then something strange happened. His mother laughed. My daughter stared at the floor, and in that exact moment, I realized something with terrifying clarity. If I reacted with emotion, we would lose. So I did the one thing nobody in that room expected. I stayed calm. My name is Margaret Whitaker. I'm 58 years old and live just outside Atlanta, Georgia, in one of those quiet neighborhoods where people wave politely while walking their dogs and pretend terrible things never happen behind closed doors. For most of my life, I worked in crisis management. When corporations were drowning in scandal, when lawsuits threatened billion-dollar reputations, they called me. My job wasn't to panic. My job was to watch carefully, gather facts, and strike at exactly the right moment. I never imagined I'd need those skills to save my own daughter. My daughter, I'll call her Claire, was 33 that spring. She was an urban planner in Austin, Texas, designing parks and pedestrian spaces because she believed cities could make people kinder. 2 years earlier, she married Daniel Mercer. On paper, Daniel looked perfect. Real estate investor, charity boards, tailored suits that screamed old money. His mother, Victoria Mercer, made sure everyone noticed. That dinner was supposed to be simple. Claire insisted on hosting it at their house in Buckhead. She said she wanted to cook my late husband George's favorite meal. George had died 6 months earlier after a sudden stroke, and Claire thought recreating our old Sunday dinners might make the grief easier. When I arrived, the house looked perfect. Too perfect. Candles lit, napkins folded into triangles, soft jazz playing. It looked less like a family dinner and more like a staged photograph. Claire hugged me tightly, but her body was stiff. Despite the warm weather, she wore long sleeves. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm really glad you came." Something about the way she said it made the hairs on my neck rise. Daniel greeted me like a politician greeting voters, warm smile, firm handshake, steady eye contact. Victoria watched everything quietly from the living room. Dinner began pleasantly. We talked about traffic, real estate, city development. Victoria dominated the conversation. "People today lack discipline," she said, swirling her wine. "Especially women." Claire laughed softly. It sounded rehearsed. Halfway through dinner, Claire reached for a serving dish. Her hand trembled slightly. The spoon clinked against the bowl. Daniel's fork froze midair. He slowly turned toward her. "Are you nervous?" he asked calmly. "Or just careless as usual?" Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel stood up slowly and leaned across the table. He grabbed her wrist and squeezed hard. I saw Claire flinch. Then he leaned closer and whispered something I couldn't hear. Victoria chuckled. "That's how women learn," she said lightly. "Embarrassment works better than kindness." The room went silent. Claire looked at me for half a second. Her eyes weren't asking for comfort. They were asking for permission to survive the moment. That's when I understood something. Shouting wouldn't help her. Calling the police right then wouldn't help without proof. So I did what I'd done in countless corporate war rooms. I watched. I memorized every movement, every word, every witness. That night wasn't the moment to react. It was the moment to prepare. But to understand how bad things had gotten, you need to know who Claire used to be. Before Daniel entered her life, Claire never apologized for existing. Her father raised her differently. Sunday mornings meant coffee, newspapers, and Claire arguing politics across the table. George used to say, "She walks like she knows where she's going, even when she doesn't." When he died, something inside her cracked. Grief doesn't destroy intelligence. It weakens boundaries. That's when Daniel appeared. They met at a development conference in Dallas. Claire said he admired her work, praised her ideas, said he respected strong women. Looking back now, I realized something chilling. It wasn't admiration. It was assessment. At first, he seemed supportive. Flowers at work, thoughtful messages. Then the tone changed. "You work too hard. Those colleagues don't appreciate you. That outfit sends the wrong message." Every sentence sounded like concern. Every sentence shaved away a piece of her confidence. Soon, Claire started editing herself. She laughed less, paused before answering questions. Our daily phone calls during her commute disappeared. "Daniel likes quiet evenings," she told me. Peace was his word for silence. The way she dressed changed too. Neutral colors, long sleeves. Daniel prefers understated. Image. That word came up constantly. He used it when asking her to skip networking events, when suggesting she decline a leadership role, when reminding her powerful men prefer wives who step back. Victoria reinforced it. A successful marriage means knowing your place, she told Claire once. The first time Daniel crossed the line physically wasn't during a fight. Claire corrected a minor zoning detail during a lunch with his investors. Daniel smiled in public. In the car afterward, he squeezed her knee slowly until she couldn't breathe. "You embarrassed me," he said calmly. The bruise looked exactly like his thumb. Claire showed it to Victoria days later, unsure if she was asking for help or permission to leave. Victoria barely glanced at it. "That's how men establish order," she said. Then she showed Claire how to hide the bruise with makeup. "That's when I realized something horrifying. This wasn't just a bad marriage, it was a system." And the night Daniel grabbed her wrist at dinner, I finally saw the structure clearly. The roles, the script, the applause for cruelty. They thought I was another woman who would excuse it. They were wrong. Because while my daughter had learned to survive by shrinking, I had spent 30 years dismantling systems built on silence. And that night, I made a promise. This would be the last time anyone convinced my child that pain was love. 3 days later, the retaliation started. Claire's colleagues stopped returning calls. Projects disappeared. People avoided her at professional events. Isolation. I'd seen the strategy before. A week later, her supervisor suggested she take time off because of personal instability. Then the attacks reached me. Anonymous complaints about my ethics. Old cases reopened. Blog posts hinting I was an overbearing mother interfering in a marriage. None of it was outright lies, just twisted fragments of truth. Within weeks, the narrative spread. Claire was unstable. I was vindictive. And it was working. One night, Claire sat at my kitchen table staring at the counter. "Maybe Daniel deserves another chance," she whispered. That's when fear hit me. Not because of him, because exhaustion was winning. "If you go back," I told her gently, "this will stop for a little while." Hope flickered in her eyes. "And then it will get worse." Tears slid down her face. That night, I realized Daniel and Victoria weren't trying to win legally. They were trying to outlast us. 3 nights later, at 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You should see what existed before Daniel learned how to hide. Inside the link were recordings of Victoria explaining how humiliation and isolation controlled difficult women. Emails discussing Claire years before the wedding. "Strong-willed," one read, "needs correction early." Another said, "If Daniel handles this properly, she will become very useful." The final file was an old police report from Asheville, North Carolina. Daniel's father had died falling down a staircase. Officially, an accident. But investigator notes mentioned injuries inconsistent with a single fall and witnesses who later withdrew statements. The last recording was Victoria's voice. "He wanted to leave," she said quietly. A pause. "I taught him otherwise." The person who sent the files introduced herself the next morning. Rachel Carter, a former house assistant who had quietly kept evidence after leaving the Mercer household. Within 48 hours, the recordings were with investigators. Daniel's polished reputation began to crack. Then he sealed his fate by violating a restraining order and showing up outside Claire's apartment. He was arrested that night. Once investigators started digging, more complaints surfaced. Financial coercion, witness intimidation, years of buried reports. The Mercer reputation collapsed. Claire asked to see Daniel one last time in a monitored courthouse room. He looked smaller when he walked in. "I never meant for things to go this far," he said, crying. Claire stood calmly. "I didn't come to negotiate," she said. "I came to tell you something." He tried to interrupt her, but she raised her hand and he stopped. "You convinced me love meant obedience," she said. "You let your mother erase me." Then she added quietly, "She didn't just raise you, she programmed you." Daniel's shoulders collapsed. "I'm filing for divorce," Claire continued. "I'm reclaiming my name and my life." "I loved you," he whispered. She shook her head. "No, you needed control." Then she walked out. That was 5 years ago. Today, Claire lives in a sunlit apartment in downtown Austin filled with plants and open windows. She designs parks for neighborhoods that never had them before. She laughs again, freely. And when the man she's seeing once raised his voice during an argument, he stopped halfway through and apologized. That's when I knew she was safe. As for Daniel and Victoria, they're no longer part of our lives. The system they built, one that thrived on silence, collapsed the moment the truth stepped into the light. Because after 30 years managing crises, I've learned something powerful people always forget. They believe they're untouchable, but they all make the same mistake eventually. They underestimate the quiet person in the room who is watching, remembering, and waiting. And sometimes, the most dangerous mistake a cruel person can make is believing a mother will stay silent when her child is in danger.